Welcome to BookFilter. I'm Michael Giltz. Today we're talking with author Karin Slaughter. Her 15th novel, Pretty Girls, is coming out this September. And we're in Atlanta, right near the Grand Hyatt Hotel, where there's a scene of her novel that takes place, so that's kind of exciting. So Karin Slaughter, thanks for taking the time to talk to us.
Thank you.
Is it exciting? You have a new book out. It's like having a baby. It's like, you know, a big event. It really is.
Well, I don't know what having a baby is like, but it certainly is a lot that goes into it, you know. But it's sort of like if you were pregnant for maybe 8.5 months and no one knew about it, and suddenly, you know, people started asking, and this thing that was just sort of quiet in my head, and maybe my publishers knew about it, but you know, suddenly it's going to be out there. So it's a little scary. It's also a little fun to think about going out and meeting people, because there's a big twist in the book. There's a lot of revelations, and it's going to be interesting to see the feedback.
There's not a big twist in the book. There's about 18 big twists in the book.
Yeah, it's pretty twisty.
Your last book was a standalone, meaning it was part of perhaps a future series, but it wasn't a book that you had to have read any of your other novels to dive right into. And we're going to see more from that book, but I think you knew that you were going to probably return to those characters, and that sort of creates a different environment when you're writing a book. You don't kill off your lead character, you know, there's certain things you probably don't do. This book, it's like you just went hog wild.
Well, you know, I mean, it's exactly what you said, because I knew that these weren't precious characters that I needed to hold on to and, you know, make sure I didn't have one of them wear an eye patch for the rest of her life, or, you know, worry about the 20th book where I have to get a bionic eye for her because I'm so tired of writing about that. But, you know, it was a little freeing. The big difference between this book and the rest of my books is there aren't any cops narrating the story. And so I had to figure out believable ways for these two women, who are the narrators, to kind of investigate a crime. You know, when you write about cops, they look at evidence, they talk to witnesses, they have a reason, you know, to be there. And I didn't want it to be, you know, two feisty gals solving a crime kind of thing. So I had to come up with believable ways for them to insert themselves into the middle of this.
And then you knew you could put them through the mill.
Exactly, yeah.
No holds barred. There's no sense of safety for anyone or anything at any time in the book.
Yeah, you know, and part of my thinking about this was, you know, everybody knows about the 50 Shades of Grey phenomenon. And it's a wonderful fantasy.
My mother knows about the 50 Shades. You know,
Exactly.
That means everybody knows.
And it's very uncomfortable when men come up at my signings and say, "Hey, have you read that 50 Shades? My wife loves it." So don't do that, please. I don't want to know about your sex life.
Why would they?
But, you know, I think it's taken some taboo off talking about that kind of thing, because more people are reading it. But I started to think, well, what if Christian really was in real life? Let's take the fantasy element out of it, you know. I think a big part of that is for women, you know, Christian acts like a man so they can act like a woman. He's not going to ever leave his socks for her to pick up, or, you know, things like that.
Or get sensitive.
Exactly. So, you know, that is kind of a female fantasy in many ways. But I thought, what if this is an actual person, you know, who's controlling, who stalks her, who, you know, does all this other stuff? What would that look like, and what would that feel like?
Really? You were sort of inspired by 50 Shades?
I really was. 50 Shades and Tramadol, which is a pain reliever. I slipped a disc in my back, and I started taking this. I don't smoke cigarettes. I've never done drugs. You know, I'm a real Girl Scout about those things. And when I started taking this narcotic, it was like, oh my God, you know, I had fever dreams. And that's when the idea for Pretty Girls came. So I actually know where the idea came from.
You've never smoked pot?
Never, no.
Well,
I promise.
I believe
promise.
it. Caffeine's a drug.
Exactly,
They're
that's
all
about
drugs.
as hard as I get. And I don't even drink much alcohol.
Yeah.
You know, I'm pretty boring as an author. I'd rather have a cupcake.
Why did that happen? Did you have a history of addiction in your family?
Well, my sister for many years was a drug addict. That certainly had something to do with it. But, you know, I'm the Nancy Reagan just say no generation. And in high
too,
school,
but I didn't listen to her.
Well, in high school, I had a couple of friends who smoked pot. One of them for the first time and had a psychotic break. And that's, yeah, and we could walk down the street to Grady Hospital, and the doctors would tell you that, you know, probably 3 or 4 times a month, they'll get in a teenager who's smoked pot and had a psychotic break. And I've always felt creativity is kind of on the cusp of, not psychosis, but, you know, it's all in that same hemisphere. And I've never wanted to mess with anything that might hinder my creativity or change it or anything like that. So I don't want to alter that.
So those those rock stars and those writers who say they, knock back a couple.
If it works for them, it works for them, and if they can live past the age of 27 doing that, then I think that's great.
Yeah, we've already done the 27, so we're.
But even F. Scott Fitzgerald, who died from his alcoholism, he never wrote when he was drinking. He just stopped cold turkey so that he could write.
So let's set the scene for the new novel. It's called Pretty Girls, and it's about two sisters. They're the prime narrators, and they're part of a family whose other sister, Julia, has disappeared.
Right.
And they don't know what happened to her, and it has torn the family apart.
Yeah.
The one sister, Lydia, seems like she's the mess. And the other sister, Claire, is the success. She's got the great husband, she's got the country club. Lydia is an alcoholic, she's a drug addict, she's been a prostitute. And yet we discover as the book begins that there's messed up things going on in Claire's life, and Lydia sort of has her act together.
Yeah, and I like playing with that. I'm the youngest of three girls, and so this is not very good for my oldest sister. Because 24 years ago, prior to the book, this oldest sister disappeared. But it does tap in a little to that dynamic where my sister kind of went off the rails, and unfortunately not like Lydia, and did have problems with drugs. And that was a very big cautionary tale for me in many ways, and maybe it made me take a different turn in my life, because I'm a real rule follower and she's a real rule breaker, and that's a difference for us. But one thing that really galvanized for me how sisters are, especially younger sisters and older sisters, is my sister came over to my house because I had invited her for lunch, and I sat down in the kitchen and she started making lunch in my house. And that's just how it is. The older sister always has to make the lunch for the younger sister, and I have no problem with that. But I thought, that's really something that I key into. And my editor, funny enough, is an older sister, so she's very bossy. And she's like, "Oh, we need to do this, this, this." And we were talking about about the dynamics, and a bit about the plot. And she said, "Well, for instance, Lydia and Claire get in a car," and she said, "Well, why would Lydia be the one driving?" I said, "Because she's the older sister." And she said, "Fair enough."
How do you know the difference between when you're writing a novel, between a twist that sort of pulls out the rug and changes everything, and one that is actually embedded in the characters and isn't just a trick where you suddenly reveal what's really going on, and something that really feels satisfying, and you're like, oh my God, what's going to happen next?
Well, there are, and actually it's funny that you said that you could read the book if you know one of the big twists.
Of course.
Because I wrote it so that all the clues are there. Because readers are so savvy, and you have to make sure that even if they figure it out, they want to keep reading. They want to figure out how it's going to play out, how it's going to affect the characters. And for me, that's the touchstone, is what's it going to do to the characters when they see this twist, when this happens. And also, that Lydia and Claire change a lot as the book progresses. It brings out some bad parts of them and some good parts of them, and Claire has been sort of kept for a while.
Like a rich and powerful husband.
Yes, and even before that, as the baby of the family, she was sort of kept safe by the family. And I wanted to write about this transformation for these women.
There's darkness in this book like all the others, but I wonder if it was a little more fun to write, because you went crazy.
I did. It was fun to write. I was writing another book before I had my drug-induced fever dream. I was writing a completely different book. I was halfway through it, and I called my editor. I said, I have this idea. This is the story I want to write. And she said, she's known me since my second book, and she trusts me. And she said, if you think you can write this book and you're passionate about it, then that's the book you need to write. And I just sat down, and in 3 months I had the basic skeleton of the book, and I was very sure about it. I knew the characters. I mean, that's such an important part of writing. It's what makes series writing a little easier, because you have this second hand with the characters. You already know them. You know how they respond, It can be a little binding, because if I write about Will Trent for 15 years, I can't suddenly say, by the way, he's into Civil War reenactments, or,
right.
Something like that, or he only has 3 toes. So it was a little freeing to get in there and create these characters from scratch. And I felt like, these are women that I know, who are friends of mine, who are my sisters, and so it did have a sense of familiarity to it, which made it easier to talk about their lives.
You know the characters, and of course when you have a twist or a turn that involves who the character is or what they've done in their life, it's satisfying because you've already built up who they are, and so it doesn't, even if it's something we didn't expect, somehow it feels part of who they are, and you don't feel betrayed. You don't think, oh, suddenly they're, So,
yeah, it has to be a believable journey, and I always go back after I've finished a book and I've had some distance from it, and I take a month off and I look at it again, and I make sure that the character in the first part of the book is believable as the character in the second part.
Right.
Because sometimes you'll have a character make a big transition, especially if it's the first time an author's written about them. And so with someone like Claire, who kind of comes out of her shell, I wanted it to be really believable, and I wanted to set the foundation for her having this ability to do the things she does in the earlier part. And so I was very careful to blend those things together.
And so when they are real characters, I mean, like you mentioned before, when people have someone in their life disappear, of course, when they hear a story about Cincinnati, or they hear a story about an abduction, it grabs them. And you have this for the characters repeatedly throughout the book. Julia, the character we find out in a short story you did, she became obsessed with a person who got disappeared. And of course, when she disappears, her family becomes obsessed. Obsessed isn't the right word, but it takes over their lives.
Right.
And we learn later through the book that when there's any disappearance anywhere, it stops you in your tracks.
Yeah.
It's not just a story or a headline or, oh yeah, it's because you can't help thinking about them, is it connected, what's happening to that family, what's going on and what they're going through. And it's just really, it makes it have a more of an emotional weight.
I absolutely agree with that. I would say maybe for women too, because I was talking about this with some friends from college, and when we read these books, you would think women wouldn't want to read books about women being abducted.
Exactly.
But we all know someone who's had, if not this experience, some experience. And we've all been scared. We've all been in the parking lot at night and we hear that sound and we just think, get to the car, lock the doors, start the car, get out of here, And men hear a noise and they turn around to see what that noise is, And that's a big difference. So I think, especially these cases where you never find out what happened, they're just so haunting. And I think a lot of women think, that could happen to me, that could happen to my sister, my mother, whatever.
Beyond the big mysteries of the twists and turns of the plot, you have little mysteries embedded in the book. Like at the beginning of the book, Claire is the wife of a rich and powerful man. She's a kept wife in a way. She's just the perfect model, but she's just ending her period of wearing an ankle bracelet. And you're like, what was that about? Then you find out she assaulted another woman at the country club. But it's a third of the book where you find out why, and it's very enjoyable. Once you find out, you're like,
you're like, go Claire.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So, and you have other mysteries like that. You have her sister, Lydia, who finds out a drowning event happens, and to a person, he says, I hope they suffer.
Yeah.
And you go, what? Why? And then you find out why. It's not the crux of the novel in the sense of once you find that out, it explains everything, but you learn more about them. And again, it's like that balance between choosing to let something, develop and tell them the full story later without them feeling frustrated and teased. How do you,
Yeah, and figuring out when to tell why Claire was wearing that ankle bracelet, it was a real delicate balance, because I thought if it's too soon, it doesn't have as much impact. If it's too late, people are like, what the hell, why didn't you tell us this a while ago? Mm-hmm. And I wanted her to tell Lydia, because it's the sort of thing that she could confide wholly in her sister. You get the feeling she hasn't told her mother and her grandmother the entire truth.
Right.
Because they don't talk about what happened to Julia. So she would just say, I got angry. But she can really explain to Lydia why. And there's this moment when they're talking and they look at each other, and there's this understanding, this is the only person in the world who went through what I went through and understands everything I understand.
And one thing that's creepy in the book is there are, people won't be surprised, there are all sorts of dark places. And one of them is, of course, a torture chamber. I don't know how else to describe it, but a place where a woman is kept, maybe more than one woman.
Yeah.
And you have to describe, well, here's where this bracelet is, and here's where that is, and here's what... And I'm like, whoa, I'm reading the book, and I just... How is it... Are you inured to it at this point, or when you're figuring out?
Maybe. It's interesting because I
don't want to figure it out. how long the cord has to be so they can move their leg a little bit, but not.
Well, I see it in my head, and maybe I have seen too much true crime and too many crime scene photos and that sort of thing. But I think it's important to be realistic, and I think those details are what's frightening. I mean, you could just as well be describing a great SM dungeon where people have lots of fun.
Where Christian is. Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. So, when you talk about this is non-consensual, this is, and also there seems to be like a work-a-dayness to it, like this is another day at the office.
Creepy.
Yeah, exactly. And to me, when you think about serial killers, for instance, they're really good at their jobs. People who just murder for the first time aren't good at it in general. They tend to get caught. But serial killers who repeatedly do this and they hone what they're doing.
If you survive.
They know how to do it. So I wanted to show that a little bit.
Is there anything about doing this book as a standalone that makes you yearn for more standalones?
Yes and no. I'm writing the next Will Trent novel, which will be out next year. It's called The Kept Woman.
Some people just let out a sigh of relief that you're doing another Will Trent novel.
Well, everybody always says when you're writing series, oh, are you going to write something different? And then you write something different. They're like, oh, where's the series?
Yeah.
So I wanted to make sure that I stayed in the mind frame where I love doing what I'm doing. And I needed to take a break from the Will Trent series because I was getting to a point where I was like, okay, what now? What could possibly happen? And I don't want to just write a book because someone's paying me to write a book.
Right.
It's not about that at all. When you write a book, the writing part is really just such a small, tiny part. It's the thinking and the processing and the.
That's what I always tell people.
Yeah.
Yeah. I'm working right now.
Exactly. Yeah. We'll write off everything with our taxes. But to me, I wanted to do Will justice and Sarah justice, and so I needed to take this little break. And now that I'm back to writing them, I'm really happy I did that because I'm excited about the story and I know where it's going.
Well, you talked about your grandmother and how you heard about the difficult life she had, but it wasn't. I was wondering when they told you, but was it something you always knew that your grandmother suffered abuse? Or?
Well, it's something that we saw at Thanksgiving when we were at the table, and she had she couldn't eat because her tooth was broken, or she had a black eye, or something like that. And we didn't really openly talk about it. I grew up in the 70s and 80s, and this was not a time when people got involved in other people's domestic stuff, And the feeling was, don't tell me how to be a husband, don't tell me how to raise my kids, that kind of thing.
And it was shameful to be hit.
And it was shameful to be a victim. Yeah. So, that's how I knew about it. But it wasn't until I was older that I put it together that this wasn't normal.
Wow. Yeah. And so it wasn't something you said, Grandma, what happened? Or your father said, no, it was just something you saw.
Yeah, and you didn't talk about it.
Wow. And of course, rape and the threat of rape is a constant in your books and in life, and there's no time in which it isn't relevant to talk about because there's always something in the news. We've got a trial going on now at a private boarding school, and there's perhaps there's a change in. Is there any change in culture? Did you feel any sense? The no is no versus yes is yes. Is that helpful?
You're talking about the trial in Connecticut, and I haven't followed it closely. I can't speak to guilt or innocence, but it did make me wonder because the premise is that this senior salute, for girls it was a feather in their cap to get this senior, and I thought, okay, well, why would she be ashamed of having sex with him and lie about it
if it's supposed to be a big exciting thing?
Yeah. And I think that actually for younger women, I certainly see this with my nieces and nephews, there's not that much of a stigma attached to being sexually active. When I was in high school, the slutty girls were known, and you didn't want to be one of those. And now, it's more acceptable, Everybody's parents are divorced. Everybody knows somebody who's cheated on somebody. Everybody,
Ashley Madison.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. And so I think for women, just the stigma of having sex, period, is being taken away. And once we take away that stigma, well, why would a woman, and not about this Connecticut case, but in general, the Cosby case maybe, why would a woman who's very successful on her own, self-supporting, has her own, life that she's living, why would she suddenly make a specious charge against a man when there's nothing really for her to gain?
Mm-hmm. One of the parts of that story in particular is the change in wording. Saying it used to be no, it means no.
Right.
But that puts the burden on the woman. And it seems a silly, modest change to say yes means yes, meaning unless they're saying yes, You know, you don't have the right to do anything. You can't just assume.
Right.
And it seems like a small change, but it really does signify a sort of a different perspective on everything.
It is. And you know, I'm not a screamer. We're talking about scared.
Yeah.
You know, when I get scared, I'm going.
You clench up.
Yeah, yeah. And I think a lot of women do that. I think a lot of men do that.
Yeah.
You know, they're not going to be macho like Tom. We're not all Tom Cruise. You
No,
know?
no. I rarely fly on the outside of a plane.
But you know, if you're rarely, if your house is broken into, did the police come and say, "Are you sure your house was broken into? I think I saw you leave your door open once, so maybe you were asking for it. So, do you really want us to investigate this crime? Because then you'll have to go to court, and that'll be hard." Rape is the only crime where the victim is given a choice about pressing the charges or even investigating. And there's such a systemic breakdown. And it's not just men who are involved in this breakdown. I mean, I just read Missoula, the Crocker piece, and I mean, my God, this woman who was the prosecutor, if what he's saying is correct in the book, it's just horrifying. And I've talked to police officers who've said to me, "I've never investigated a rape where it was actually a rape." And I thought,
wow, what a weird career you've had.
Right. Statistically, that's not possible, you know, because such a low percentage of reported rape is vindictive reporting, right?
Right.
I mean,
the novel or TV movie idea where you make a false charge.
Right. It's a great story on TV, but it doesn't really happen in real life that much.
Disappearingly small.
Exactly. Yeah. So, you know, it's a really rife subject matter. What bothers me is that when you talk about it, they say you're being political. And I think that it's in men and women's interests to try to stop this. But it's the 10% rule, you know, on college campuses. It's 10% of the guys who are committing these crimes.
And they're doing 90, they're doing,
Right. So, you know, but so if you say to a girl, you know, here's some cupcakes, 10% of them are poison.
Enjoy.
Enjoy. So it really does make you think, okay, well, what can we do to get young guys to be more aware of this, right? And to spot this behavior. And, you know, guys tend to be like, oh, he's just being a jerk. He's just, you know, because
they make a fuss to challenge him.
Right.
That's not a funny joke, actually.
Yeah, yeah. And it's like the study that said, okay, well, a lot of male comedians believe that women aren't funny, right? Because they don't, but women don't find jokes where they're marginalized and made fun of as stupid very funny.
So they're not laughing at their bad jokes.
Right, yeah. It's like, why would I read a Tom Clancy book when there aren't any women in it? Or if there's one woman, she's just there to give him a blowjob or something. You know, what as a woman am I interested in when I read that? So, you know, I just think it's like a shift in thinking. And saying, look, this isn't political. This is your mom. This is your sister. This is make the world a little bit better for them, because whoever that girl is, she's not a crazy B word.
Yeah.
You know.
You can say it.
Yeah, she's not a crazy bitch.
Yeah.
I hate that because it's just like it dismisses large swaths of women when you say they're a crazy bitch. But when you say a guy's an asshole, that's kind of a powerful thing.
Right. Donald Trump's an asshole.
Yeah, exactly. Right.
Isn't he great?
Yeah.
This book. Did I miss some big? Because I felt like it was just a roller coaster.
Yeah, you know,
I'm sure there was something in there. Just
we're talking about some
the
heavy
worldview.
issues here, but the book is really—it's just meant to be enjoyed.
Yeah.
All of them are really, and if you get, you know, I love writing on different levels, and if you want a deeper meaning, it's there. If you just want to take it and read it on the beach and have fun, it's there. You know, but no one goes around saying, you know, I love Gone Girl because of the socioeconomic dynamics
right.
and the, you know, the psychology of a man versus
the use
woman.
of media.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, no one says that. They're like, oh, great twist, you know. And so I think all good books should be that way. You know, they should exist on all those different levels.
And are you just finding yourself? Are you more excited than ever about writing? Because that can become a job. But the ideas are coming, and these 2 standalone books, and now you're returning to Blue Trent, and you feel recharged, and you're excited to get back to it.
Absolutely. I came here from where I was writing in the mountains, just, you know, loving that, and this is, it's really jarring to be in real people clothes right now. But
what are you wearing in the mountains?
My pajamas.
You got jeans and an untucked shirt. That's pretty casual.
Yeah.
So you're in pajamas out in the woods?
Exactly, yeah.
Well, thanks for taking the time to talk with us, and good luck with the new book.